watched a lot of anime, okay? Duh. Look at me. I'm non-binary. If you've ever questioned if you're non-binary or trans, this video is for you. If you're questioning right now, this video is for you. My name is Iris, I'm non-binary, I use she, he, they pronouns, and I've been making videos about it for a while now. We're gonna go through some guiding questions, so you're not gonna leave this video with a yes or no. Well, you might. That's less of the goal here, and the goal is to provide a framework for you to think about gender, gender identity, your gender identity, how you might feel impacted by the system of gender. Today, I'm here to help you do some introspection, and that might lead to an identification of your gender, and it might just lead to some thoughts, and that's okay. It might help you organize some thoughts as well. There's gonna be a lot to chew on here, so grab some water, grab a drink, grab a snack. If you need to pee, go pee and come back. I know half of you are ignoring your body's signals right now, and I want to give you the opportunity right now to tap in. Okay, let's get into it. My first question for you is, are you questioning your gender? This is the first stage for a lot of us in figuring out that we might not be cis. You might find yourself drawn to trans and non-binary people either around you or online. You might find yourself watching this video. You could be interested in exploring dressing in a different way or expressing yourself differently in terms of your appearance. And if you're obsessing or consistently thinking about it to the point that it is impacting your thoughts and feelings multiple times a week or every day, that's a sign that you might want to explore the options of different gender identities. I want to put in a note here for the OCD folks, of which I am one. I cannot even describe to you. I don't want to describe. That does not mean that my thoughts about my gender weren't real though. And I think that can be a really hard thing to come to terms with when you struggle with mental health issues. There are a lot of trans and queer people who are neurodivergent. That does not mean that your experience of gender isn't valid or something that you shouldn't be exploring. First, we need to talk about what gender actually is. Gender is a social construct. A lot of people say gender is fake. Not exactly. I don't necessarily agree with that. If you're here watching this video, you might be already familiar with the distinction between biological sex and gender identity. Gender is constructed of a whole bunch of different things, not just identity, but behaviors, language, social roles, and gender expression, which is appearance, mannerisms, that type of thing. There is so much to it into how gender is perceived socially, and it isn't just inherent identity. I have always talked about gender as theater, how I approach gender as theater. I often think of drag as this like very potent representation of that. So gender isn't just identity, it is social. It is in some ways a performance. I'm going to amend this. I kind of stumbled by saying performance and only talking about performance as display, drag, theater, expression, because we also talk about performativity in gender theory, and that is not simply display. It is the capacity of repeated action of speech to create social reality. Judith Butler talks about gender as repetition. Basically, we are all doing the same dance of gender, and that is the thing that makes gender. It is the fact that we are doing it. I am talking about gender performance mostly as display in this video, as expression. One of the ways that we actualize gender is through performing it, aka showing it, expressing it, doing it, behaving in accordance with it in a way that can be perceived by other people. That does not mean that gender performance or gender display is inauthentic. A lot of people going through transition will take up expressive acts, stylized acts that are associated with the gender they are transitioning to as like an affirming action, but that doesn't mean that that's inauthentic, and it doesn't mean that gender identity has to be actualized through display in order for it to be real for someone. I think gender identity is sort of more energetic, and that one of the ways that we describe energy is through the framework of gender. So I'm not saying that gender identity necessitates performance through display in order to be actualized. You can be a trans man without ever transitioning. You can be a trans man while still performing within another gender framework. As in, if you're a trans adult, but you are presenting differently as a child, that does not mean that you turned trans or that you weren't a man before. Although gender fluidity is real and a shift in gender can happen for some people, it is case by case. And transition is not necessary in order to like validate a gender identity. I was always non-binary and repeatedly performing within the framework of womanhood, which was a dysphoric experience for me. But now that I have a better understanding of my own gender identity, I am actually more able to comfortably do things that are deemed feminine and present in ways deemed feminine than I was before, because I no longer feel like I am living inside a framework that is not meant for me. If you'd like to elaborate on your definition of gender, feel free to do so. I am not the end all be all. Okay, I am very fully encompassing, looking at many aspects when I'm time talking about gender that I couldn't possibly describe them all in a video like this. And that isn't the goal of this video. I know a lot of people jump to correcting me, which is why it takes me so long to make these videos, because I'm often like trying to anticipate every little thing. You know, the people who might jump to saying that I'm invalidating trans people by saying that gender is a performance. I'm not. I'm not. With that, I want to say that the people who use anything I would say to like invalidate a trans person's experience are transphobic. Those are people who are already looking for ways to invalidate a trans person's experience, and that's not the discussion we're having today. It is never my goal to look at two gender non-conforming people and say like, you're really trans and you're not really trans, and this is the list of reasons why. I have no interest in doing that, and I think that the search for the correct answer is often like completely fraught with issues. Gender is one of the ways that we can look at how we embody personhood in the social context. Biological sex, on the other hand, is a label put on a specific set of reproductive organs, chromosomes, and hormones in the body. This includes primary and secondary sex characteristics. That's the basic rundown. I do want to point out a section from this book by Judith Butler. In the chapter, "What Gender Are You?" they say, when a designated official assigns a sex on a basis of observation, they rely on a mode of observation generally structured by the anticipation of the binary option male or female. They do not answer the question what gender, rather they answer the question which gender. The marking of sex is the first operation of gender, even though that obligatory option of male or female has prepared the scene. In this sense, gender might be said to precede sex assignment, functioning as a structural anticipation of the binary that organizes observable facts and regulates the act of assignment itself. People whose worldview is limited to only accepting the binary genders as valid and real will use biological sex exclusively to mark gender. But actually they won't. Because gender is social. We'll get into that. Let me rephrase that. They will rely on biological sex to mark the gender category which a new person will be raised inside of the two binary genders. So that's where we're kind of working from with biological sex. I will repeat this definition later, but non-binary is an umbrella term for any gender identity that is not singularly man or singularly woman. The non-binary umbrella falls under the trans umbrella, so you might also hear non-binary people referring to themselves as trans. That's not universal. There are some non-binary people who feel pretty oriented around the gender they were assigned at birth as, so they might not choose to use the word trans to describe themselves, but you should never tell a non-binary person that they aren't trans. Okay, because you're in the wrong if you do that. I'm trans. I'm a trans non-binary person. Even though I haven't undergone medical transition. You don't have to undergo medical transition if you're transgender or if you're non-binary, by the way. I think some people are apprehensive to using that word to describe themselves. Let me just put it in these terms. When I am using the word trans to describe myself, I'm not comparing my experience to that of a trans man or to a trans woman, because that is not my experience. Our experiences might be different. Our experiences might be sort of shared. The choices that I make might be different from somebody else. Being transgender or non-binary isn't something that is homogenous. When we make the assumption that it is or try to assert that there is one way to be non-binary, we are severely lacking a queer perspective. And you find this a lot in online discussions of gender, especially those around transmasculine people in the lesbian community. Transmasculine lesbians deserve nuance in the discussion of their gender and sexuality. They deserve nuance in their discussion of their lived experience and place in the collective. If you're unwilling to approach other queer people with nuance, do not be surprised if you get shut down or rejected. The queer community was not built on making new strict rules on how to behave and how to be. Okay, I had a snack. Around the beginning of when I was really starting to think about my gender and redefine it, I was watching a video that Georgia Bridgers made with their sibling Hope. And Hope said that one of the ways that they knew that they were non-binary is that every time that they were in a group of women, they felt different. And they felt the same way about being in groups of men, being not one of this group in terms of gender. This was really revealing to me when I heard it because I definitely related. So ask yourself, when you're surrounded by women, do you feel like you're one of them? What about with men? Do you want to be one of them? I've absolutely had that feeling of otherness throughout my life. And I do want to say that there are other reasons that we might feel othered in a social group. Maybe you are neurodivergent. I also want to stress once again that this does not mean that you are not having a different gender experience if you are experiencing these compounding factors, right? Gender is absolutely allowed to be one of the reasons for you to be feeling othered, even if you have these other things going on as well. So maybe you're neurodivergent, or maybe you're from a different socioeconomic class or a different racial or ethnic background. These are all situations in which you might feel othered in a group. And this can intersect in a lot of ways with the way the perception of gender can be altered by race or ethnicity. For example, what does it mean to be a white Christian woman? What is the right way to act according to that definition of womanhood? These are socially and religiously defined rules, but there are actually many definitions of womanhood all over the world. What it means to act, talk, walk like a woman. When we talk about gender, it has to be from an intersectional perspective. A group of white women might enact misogynoir against a black woman that make this woman feel othered based both on gender and on racial or ethnic background. Perhaps they point out ethnic features that appear masculine or androgynous, with white womanhood as the blueprint for who looks the most feminine. That's white supremacy in practice. In an expansive and inclusive reality, there is no one way to embody womanhood. But the white woman in this scenario I'm talking about might be asserting themselves and their behavior and language and presentation as the correct way to be a woman. And they're using that as a way of putting down or pulling away from somebody from a different ethnic background who isn't behaving according to those rules. It's a process that rejects anyone who does not assimilate. So if you define the rejection you feel as based in gender, it's also allowed to have these other features at play. That doesn't mean that you're not actually non-binary or trans. If you're feeling othered in these situations, the different aspects don't cancel each other out. They work together. Thinking about those factors should also help give you a more comprehensive guidebook in kind of figuring out your gender identity and how it's at play socially. Looking at those different aspects might also help you determine whether or not you feel trans or non-binary, or if you're cisgender and experiencing these forms of othering. And on cisgenderness, I want to read a section from this book, Before We Were Trans by Kit Ham. The word cis is sometimes misunderstood as referring to stereotypes. Much of the opposition to it, as in using the word cis, you kind of see that online, people who are like, don't call me cis, right? This is talking about that. Much of the opposition to it rests on the idea that to call someone a cis woman is to say that she is comfortable with society's narrow idea of femininity. In reality, though, the way most trans people use it is to refer not to stereotypes, but to self-identification. A cis woman is someone who was assigned female at birth and is happy to describe herself as a woman, regardless of how much she defies society's idea of what woman should mean. So when you're figuring out if you're cis, especially in these contexts where you feel othered or you feel like you are not represented by the stereotypes of what womanhood is, you can still identify as a cis woman if you're comfortable with the label of womanhood. But if you are not, then identify as something else, and that's good. I know that a lot of people who are questioning their gender are afraid of overstepping. Like, what if I'm not really trans or non-binary, and then I say that I am, and then I take it back, and blah. Even people who ask the question, like, I'm cisgender, but I want to wear a binder, is that okay? By the way, yes, it is absolutely okay. Or maybe you want to try different pronouns or a different name. Even if you are strictly cisgender or turn out to be cisgender, it's okay to investigate what makes you feel the most like yourself, and I think we should all be doing that. My process of alienation felt like I was sort of pulling into myself and protecting myself in groups of girls. And much of this was in adolescence, so I wouldn't say that I was surrounded by the most mature energies, right? Either way, I ended up questioning my gender and I figured out I'm non-binary. When you have repeated experiences that make you feel othered on a gendered basis, you might begin to look at this as having something to do with your relationship to your own gender and how you self-conceptualize compared to other people, because we are not all the same. And sometimes the rules just don't fit. And sometimes your answer to the question of, am I a man or a woman? It's not going to be that binary answer. So gender does impact all of us regardless of personal identity. And if we subscribe to the gender binary or not, we're still impacted by it. Another question to ask yourself is, do you compare yourself to gender nonconforming people? I was personally a little bit jealous of, and I wanted to be like a non-binary person I knew. This was right before my realization I was non-binary. Up until that realization in 2020, I hadn't really related to any other non-binary people I knew personally in real life because my gender identity didn't match theirs. There are so many different ways to be non-binary, to be honest, that you might not resonate with everything that a non-binary person says. So like when I was getting these clear examples of non-binariness and I just like didn't resonate with them, I kind of just assumed I wasn't non-binary, but that obviously didn't turn out to be true. It just took me a little longer to get there and to understand what it meant to me. I was pretty grateful to grow up in a pretty progressive community. I knew trans and non-binary people. I was friends with them. Shocker. And honestly, when I was in high school, I was like, oh, like there's something going on here with my gender, but we're gonna leave that be for now. I'm not gonna investigate this further. I was just like, I can't handle this right now. So I put it on the back burner, and I'm honestly really glad that I did. And since I put the cap on it pretty early on, it didn't really hit the obsession phase, so it wasn't really like destroying me internally that I wasn't exploring it, right? I was just sort of like, oh, there's something there. I will save that for later. I also realized that sometimes when I got a crush on a character, it was more so because I wanted to like exude the same kind of like energy that they had. And this would continually happen with boys, especially more like androgynous male characters. I watched a lot of anime, okay? Duh. Look at me. I'm non-binary. A helpful thing to consider when you're questioning your gender is to figure out where you are on the gender spectrum in the gender soup of things. A lot of the time I reference the gender binary in reference to myself and how I talk about gender presentation because a lot of people are familiar with that framework. I'm kind of moving away from it. I'm relatively comfortable relating to it, but I'm becoming more uncomfortable relating to it as fascism is fascizing. Obviously, it's been doing that, okay? I'm not dumb. A lot of people are familiar with the male-female binary framework, so it can be a helpful place to start, especially when you're questioning, where do I fall in this? Am I closer to a man? Am I closer to a woman? Do those both feel bad? Do they both feel good? Non-binary is an umbrella term for any gender identity that is not singularly one of the binary gender identities. So not singularly man and not singularly woman. This can overlap with transness in a lot of ways, and there are a lot of people who identify as both trans and non-binary, but like you can have a trans man who doesn't identify as non-binary. Some trans people feel iffy about non-binary people because they feel that we are like making a mockery of them or destroying cultural respect for trans identities because we're so like loud about it and blue-haired. I'm talking about like specific people who think that way, and there are a lot of people who aren't trans who have a similar perspective on non-binariness. The divided opinions within the queer collective can make defining yourself really intimidating. I think a lot of queer people have had this experience of feeling really alienated and needing to assert themselves very strongly in order to be seen or heard in cis-het spaces. There's the need to come at it from this like utter confidence in order to be seen as valid or not as somebody who can be picked on easily. And then when we get to a queer space, we might assume that we need to act the same way in order to be seen or heard. It feels like kind of a learned reactionary response from facing cis-het spaces where we are not welcome. We're kind of like stuck in that learned reactionary response in queer spaces as well. And I talked earlier with the discourse online about transmasculine lesbians. There are instances when somebody realizes their place in the queer collective and then begins sort of acting as a gatekeeper, taking up the role of defining what it is to be queer, much like they were excluded from the what it is to be in cis-het spaces. Now they get to define what it is to be in queer spaces. They get to be somebody who has power in that space. But the reality is that queerness isn't something that you need to be accepted into. It is something that you realize about yourself. And as a queer person, there is space for you. These are some non-binary types. I think it can be good to have like a list of options. These labels can be helpful, but they can also be unhelpful. It's okay to just be like, well, I'm not cis, I'm non-binary, and leave it there. But labels can be really helpful for articulation. I'll leave a link in the description with a list of a whole bunch of non-binary identities so you can look through there and browse and see if anything resonates with you. I think that these identity groups can be a really great way to articulate how you feel or learn to articulate how you feel based on like, okay, what does this identity say about gender, right? You can kind of mishmash and figure out what the right thing is for you. And you can also have multiple. That's chill too. There's no shame in changing things. If the vibe changes, we're all humans growing and being different and changing throughout life. Like, that's totally chill. You don't need to figure out right away or figure it out, period. If just saying that you're genderqueer or non-binary is enough for you, that's enough. Here's a short list of some more well-known non-binary identities. Non-binary, genderqueer, these are umbrella terms, but a lot of people use these as sole identity markers as well. Agender, which is having an absence of relevant gender feelings. Gender fluid, which is moving between two or more gender identities. So it's like sometimes I might feel like a man, sometimes I might feel like a woman, sometimes I might feel like something else. That's gender fluid. The gender identities might co-occur simultaneously, but gender fluid people usually are like, I'm one thing, and then I'm another, and then I'm another. Demigender, aka demi-boy or demi-girl. So you have an experience connected to gender that you don't feel is irrelevant. When we talk about somebody who's like a demi-man or a demi-boy, this could be somebody who describes like themselves as like part man and part genderless. But I think people use this term in a lot of ways to basically say that they have like an expanded experience with gender. Also, for an example, with like gender fluidity, you could identify as sometimes a demi-girl or demi-woman, whatever words resonate, and sometimes a boy or a man within your gender experience, right? So you can experience both being gender fluid and demi-gender. These things can co-occur with each other. Bigender, which is experiencing two genders at the same time. Doesn't have to be man and woman, often is. And then we have pangender / omnigender. I am personally omnigender. I have an affinity for the gender binary, and so I use also the term bigender to describe myself. I'm bigender and omnigender. So my gender experiences of like man and woman co-occur simultaneously. And also all the other stuff, right? So it's not just man and woman, it's like all, it's just like comprehensive. Pangender and omnigender mean encompassing like many, multiple, or all genders. Also, by the way, the reason I use omnigender instead of pangender, even though they mean the exact same thing, is because one, I like how omnigender sounds better. Pan feels like linguistically related to like a plane or a line, so it doesn't like connect with me as much linguistically as omnigender does. I would tread carefully with guessing about anybody else's gender identity based on like what they share with you. Unless somebody is soliciting advice, I wouldn't give it to them, right? Like I've had people leave comments for me that are like, this sounds like gender fluid. Never once have I described myself as gender fluid because I'm not gender fluid. I understand that maybe you want to help somebody that is gender queer, but no one likes to be told who they are, especially not in an unsolicited way. You might help somebody out just by existing near them. Talk about your experience. I'm talking about like in person, if you're around people, if they say something that sounds a little eggy, talk about your experience, right? Ask them questions about theirs. Talk about gender in a less assigning way. Like, why are we all leaping to assign other people things? Sounds a little, as we were talking earlier about sex assignment to me. I know that personally, by talking about my own gender experience, that I have created safe spaces for other gender queer people who maybe haven't had as many opportunities to talk about their gender. And it was never me telling somebody else what they might be experiencing. It was always just me talking about me and my experience. And also putting cute hair clips in a girl's hair. She's fully a woman. It's beautiful. I was in love with her. Also, I want to say that we need to tread lightly in the non-binary community with AFAB and AMAB label usage. You will hear gender theorists be using the full like assigned at birth language because AMAB and AFAB, like those are things that are done unto you, right? When you are assigned female at birth, that is something that was done to you. So a lot of people don't like wrapping that up into their own identity. And when we use it to shorthand the lived experience of maybe like having grown up socialized as a woman for people who are assigned female at birth, we're importing a lot of importance onto biological sex rather than like socialized experience. It really depends on what kind of conversation you're having, like how deep it's going to be and like how much you're going to have to talk about that specifically. But I have heard like a lot of trans people like not liking it. Nonetheless, those labels are something that non-binary people do tend to lean into when they're having conversations with each other as a shorthand for communicating like lived experience. But be mindful and be open to having conversation about that. I rarely talk about having been assigned female at birth. Once again, notice how I use the language this was done unto me, not I am assigned female at birth. There is a distinction. Some people will use it differently. Be aware when someone uses it differently. I'm not saying you can't do something, but I'm saying like be aware of those things. You might hear me say it the other way sometimes. In an effort to be woke, I'm talking about this. In my videos, I often just talk about being non-binary without talking about my biological sex that much. I talk about my social experience. I talk about sort of body experience as well. For me personally, I just use the word non-binary to describe myself. I think that's how I'm going to connect to and relate to like the most people with similar experiences experiences as me by presenting myself as our shared label, like, hello. This is something that I share with you, and we might have totally different experiences and ways we move in the world, but we also relate in sort of this like shared otherness. If you are questioning your gender, welcome to the club. You don't need to figure out everything right away, and I encourage you to take your time. Practice getting into your energy in private. What do you like about yourself? What makes you feel good? How can you feel more like yourself? What does that mean? It's not all gonna be about gender, but some of it might be. When you have people like digging fingers into your skin and trying to keep you a certain way or like shake an answer out of you, I know it can feel really overwhelming. You've got this, okay? Stay grounded. It's you. Only you know the answer here. And isn't that wonderful? Maybe kind of overwhelming, but also wonderful. If you're comfortable commenting on this video, I would love to hear how long ago you started questioning your gender. Even if you're done questioning your gender at this point and you're just like watching this video because you want to hear what I have to say, like, I want to know how long ago that was. You are all so loved. Even if you haven't found that love in your surroundings yet, it exists. It's waiting for you. Move towards that. Okay, I will see you in the next one.